guidelines. But beyond that, the actual editorials are not being made by some establishment hack. Now, obviously, viewers were very concerned when I told Rising that this would change. That instead of myself of questioning the establishment, calling them out, thinking outside the orthodoxy, and criticizing our leaders, that I would instead morph into some shill or stay quiet when I would normally speak out. So I made numerous assurances that this was not happening at Rising, that I was free to say what I wanted, and I was free to talk about what I wanted, and that was true. My radars over the past year were all me. I wrote every single one. I didn't have to consult with anyone about what the topic would be or what I would say about that topic. No one edited the pieces. They were 100% mine. No one ever told me what to say or what not to say at Rising. And I know that I made some of my colleagues uncomfortable with some of the things I would say. And when I did, never once did a manager or producer pull me aside to tell me to tone it down. I was completely free to say whatever I wanted at Rising. And I did. I said whatever I wanted, most notably openly criticizing the pandemic response, vaccine mandates, and Fauci. I still remember the first time back in August of 2021, when I stated that the vaccines don't stop the spread, and I was met with fierce resistance to that idea. Do you remember this? Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand. We know now that the vaccine doesn't stop the spread, so I can understand maybe doing a vaccine mandate if there were.
It certainly stops the spread. And
it doesn't stop the spread. We know it doesn't. The science is clear that it's not stopping any spread. My open criticisms of the narrative, decisions around the pandemic, and Fauci brought in millions of views for Rising. Out of all the hosts, COVID and the pandemic response was my topic. All of the viewers knew this. So when I found out Sunday night that Fauci was going to be on the show, I was excited. This was a moment I had waited for and viewers had waited for. I had questions that I wanted to ask him, like, does he still support mandates for these non-sterilizing vaccines? With mRNAs not succeeding in ending the pandemic, why is he still pushing for them? And many more. I had a lot of questions. But then Sunday night, I got a call from the producers telling me that when they submitted for the interview a couple of weeks earlier, Fauci's team had asked who the hosts were going to be. And they didn't list my name. They told them Batya and Ravi would be the hosts. They said originally the interview was going to be earlier than when I typically show up. And so they didn't think to include me. Now, I dispute this because there have been numerous occasions when a guest who they know I would be particularly interested in talking with is scheduled early. And then they ask me if I want to join to be part of that interview. Sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no. But I think obviously interviewing Fauci of all people, it would have been one of those times to ask me. So I told the producers that they needed to go back to Fauci's team and tell them I'm in the interview. And if you won't agree to do it, then we make a segment about that. We say Fauci wouldn't face us, that it needed to be all of us or none of us, especially since the interview had been moved to later in the day when I'm there. So I made it clear that anything other than this would cause the viewers to lose trust in Rising, and trust is what matters most. The viewers had flocked to Rising for this content, and to let them down like this would just break their trust completely. So they seemed to understand this Sunday night. Now, the next morning, as I'm ready to join the show and I'm getting ready to do my radar and possibly interview Fauci, I got a phone call from the executive producer telling me that they have made the final decision to not approach Fauci's team, but to instead move forward with the interview without me. They wanted me to come on the show, record a couple of segments, then ask me to leave so that they could interview Fauci. And I expressed that this was a giant mistake, that the viewers would no longer trust the show, that I had told viewers I wouldn't be censored or held back. And how can I go back to the viewers after this and say with a straight face that I'm not being censored or limited? How am I supposed to do that? I mean, there were times in the past when viewers would accuse the show of holding me back or censoring me or limiting me, and it wasn't really the case. It was other circumstances that made it to where I wasn't in the segment. But in this particular case, I wasn't the situation. So what was I supposed to say to viewers after this? How could I say, yeah, it's corporate media, but trust me, guys, I'm not being censored or held back? I mean, up until this point, it was true, but after this, I wouldn't be able to say that. And that would make me a liar, and it would put my reputation at risk because I made promises to the viewers. And so, because of all of this, I am no longer with Rising. Now, I want to say there are a lot of really good people who work at Rising. The team is amazing, and I had a really great time over this past year being on that show. I don't regret a single moment of it, and I also want that show to be successful because there are so many great people working there. And I hope for the sake of those great people working there who are now worried about their jobs, that those who are making the editorial decisions will go forward making better choices, understanding that viewers' trust is the most important thing. It's the only thing, and the only way to gain and maintain that trust.
Your idea is cut off private equity's money spigot. You say a variety of legislative and regulatory actions would make it hard for private equity to stay in business, and that should be the goal. First of all, tell people why private equity is so evil and bad. And second of all, tell us how we could basically bring it to its knees.
Well, private equity is just among the most malevolent sources in American economic life and global economic life.
Can I maybe have a leave?
These are investment companies that use borrowed money to buy up various firms that they then throw all of the debt that they use to buy the company onto that company, so that they now have, in addition to running their business, they have this massive amount of debt they have to service. This ultimately leads to lowering labor costs, lowering safety costs, lowering anything that they can so they can go on as a viable business. It often leads to bankruptcy. And basically what happens in the midst of that process is private equity sucks the value out of these businesses as much as they can and leaves them in a husk by the side of the road. And we've seen this over.
All right, literally while we're filming the show, we get the official live numbers of the U.S. economy as the recession definition game had been playing out. The Biden administration's fears have come true. So the U.S. economy shrinks for the second straight quarter, as the press is saying it, quote, igniting recession fears. In other words, it is technically a recession. Now, all of these definitions just are so annoying to me, and I was talking about this yesterday. Nobody cares whether you're technically in a recession or you're technically in a boom. They care, can you afford something, and are you employed? So to that extent, no, the definition doesn't matter. But to the extent that politically the White House is gaslighting all of us by saying, no, we're not technically in a recession. Actually, we're in the strongest job economy since World War II. Stop. Like, that is just not comporting with the facts whatsoever. The current facts are that the U.S. economy contracted for the second straight quarter, growth falling by 1% approximately, so 0.9% annual rate in the April to June period. That matters because GDP also fell for 1.6 annualized rate in the first 3 months of the year. So you have 2 straight quarters of technical shrinking GDP. Now, the pushback is that we have a low unemployment rate. Now, it does seem, while yes, inflation is high, that consumer spending does not be in typical recession territory. But that's the whole point as to this economic moment, and the economy that we're living in is very wonky. Arguing whether we're technically in a recession or not really, honestly, doesn't matter. Last time I checked, inflation is sky high on food and on gas. The Biden administration is celebrating the gas is only $4.30 a gallon nationally. The economy's not good. I just don't know why that we can't just lead with that and that be the demarcation point. But unfortunately, the White House has chosen to majorly politicize the quote definition of recession when it does them no good. I see no point why you would pick this fight.
Well, that's the part for me is it's just sort of silly. It's like, this is not helping you all politically to deny the reality that people are living and feeling every day. And it's, filled with a sort of condescension towards the American people who know exactly what is going on in their own lives in real time. Even before you had these new numbers indicating that you had 2 straight quarters of GDP growth, you had 58% of Americans saying they thought we were already in a recession. So
Exactly.
people have been there, whether you're, parsing the words of the technical definition or not, ultimately. And also, yesterday we did have the Fed move on. It was what we expected, 75 basis points, which I think in some ways people are like, oh, that's no big deal because they had floated possibly 100 basis points. That'd be a full percentage point interest rate hike. But we had not, until last month, we had not had the Fed hike interest rates by that high of a number since 1994. So to do it 2 months straight in a row is really quite exceptional. And I continue to see news coming out of the housing market in particular about just what a dire impact that is having on, new housing starts, which, by the way, need housing to be built. That's the other piece of this that is really important to remember, is that when the Fed is hiking interest rates, that's not only hitting you directly, what they call like dampening demand, which just basically means you don't have money to spend, but it's also impacting companies' ability to invest in things like, new housing construction. So it's also hurting the supply side, which is the exact opposite of what you ultimately want to do. So again, some really disturbing numbers on the GDP growth piece. Last quarter, this was attributable a lot to the fact that companies have been struggling with what their inventory levels should be. They got caught with, their just-in-time practices, not having enough, and they had shortages. Then they stocked up, then they had too much, and they had surpluses. And so they've been having trouble sort of figuring out the proper inventory levels. And since they've been selling off inventory rather than acquiring more, that's a hit on GDP growth. That was a lot of the story of last quarter.
And right now, personal consumption, as I talked about, it did grow by 1%, but it actually has decelerated significantly by a full percentage point from 1.8% in Q1. So that actually is less than what was expected for the personal consumption rate, which does mean that we are seeing a deceleration, although it is still growing. That's kind of the full picture. I don't think it damn matters, but White House doing itself no favor by trying to redefine all of this when honestly they're doing some good things.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need. Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we, Crystal?
Indeed, we do. There is a lot happening. Something
Big stuff.
crazy occurred, which is Democrats actually decided they might do a few things.
Took 2 years.
Yeah, it took 2 years.
Trump made his return here to Washington, D.C., spoke towards the America First Policy Institute, headed by some former Rick Perry staffers. Very America First, indeed. But in the speech itself, it's noteworthy in order to look at what he's talking about. So this is kind of a follow-up of the interview that we did in our last show with Jonathan Swan around the use of a Schedule F, known as an executive order, which would reschedule federal bureaucrats and enable Trump to fire them and replace them with personnel that he chose. So he specifically actually mentioned that executive order, personnel, and more in his speech. Now, before we play the speech, for the YouTube gods and copyright for content moderation, no, we understand here on this show that these claims are false, that Trump did win the election. He claims it. However, as a news organization, we are obliged, in order to put together an accurate representation of the former president's comments, who is likely to run for president. So within all of that context of the facts, before you even play this video, let's take a listen to some highlights from Trump's speech.
I ran a second time and I did much better. We got millions and millions more votes. And you know what? That's going to be a story for a long time. What a disgrace it was. But we may just have to do it again. We have to straighten out our country. We had it there. We actually did it twice. We need to make it much easier to fire rogue bureaucrats who are deliberately undermining democracy, or at a minimum, just want to keep their jobs. They want to hold on to their jobs. Congress should pass historic reforms empowering the president to ensure that any bureaucrat who is corrupt, incompetent, or unnecessary for the job can be told, did you ever hear this? You're fired. Get out. You're fired. have to do it.
Christ.
So you can see he's making a reference there. And the reason we played that one at the top
Yeah,
is
I
because it
can
clearly
see.
alludes to wanting to run again and then also talking about personnel matters.
You're fucking useless.
So let me know if this sounds familiar. You're dealing with somebody, it could be a friend, a family member, romantic partner, a coworker. You're picking up on some vibes that this person is not happy, but they're not really letting you know in a direct manner. And instead, this aggression is leaking out in sort of more subtle ways through their actions and words. So what's an example of that? I'm sure we've all had this happen. Somebody starts talking, and it almost sounds like at first like they're giving you a bit of a compliment. But then by the end of their sentence, there's like this subtle insult or dig kind of like built into the compliment. And you're kind of left in this confused state. You're like, well, was that a compliment or was that person actually insulting me? So if any of this stuff sounds familiar, you're not alone. This is called passive aggression or passive aggressive behavior. And there's a lot of this going on in our culture. So at its core, it is definitely a manipulation technique. And it can kind of range, sort of like a spectrum, right? It can range anywhere from subtle all the way up to like extremely toxic. Basically, a person that's passive aggressive, they might want to be aggressive, they might want to be direct, but for whatever reason, I'll go into more of what those reasons could be in a minute, they aren't able to do that. They aren't able to be direct. Maybe they're scared of looking bad. Nobody wants to be that aggressive, crazy person. Maybe they're scared of triggering somebody. Maybe they're in a relationship with somebody who's really easily angered or triggered. So they're always trying to deliver, they still have these issues and problems that they would like to voice, but they maybe can't say it directly. So they allow these things to come in these other backhanded ways. It seems like passive aggressive behavior sort of is born out of this. It's almost like a coping mechanism for feeling helpless. And I think that's why you frequently see it in situations where you have a subordinate and a superior. So you'll see it a lot with kids and their parents. I think passive aggression is also used frequently to avoid confrontation. A lot of people are scared to bring their issues forth, their problems, especially with their family, their romantic partners. And they don't want to lose that relationship or jeopardize that relationship. Passive aggression, I think, also comes out when people don't want to enforce their boundaries. So rather than being direct about this is my standard, you're crossing my boundaries, please don't do that. It's like they sort of get uncomfortable. They know their boundaries are being crossed, but they don't want to say it. And then it's like this subtle anger and aggression kind of comes out in some other way. Passive aggressive behavior can kind of come in two different categories. And it's sort of the level of toxicity of these techniques. So those two categories are unintentional kind of passive aggressive behaviors or malicious passive aggressive behaviors. So malicious is purposely doing some of this stuff to achieve some kind of a goal. And I'll go into more examples of that. The unintentional flavor of passive aggressiveness is sort of done by these people who are afraid to say something. They're afraid to stand up for themselves for whatever reason. It could be for valid or invalid reasons, but they're not doing it intentionally in a malicious way. So I wanted to differentiate those two types because you will experience both types. And in my opinion, the malicious passive aggressive behavior, those people, you really ought to watch out for those people because it's extremely sly. It's just like deceptive is what it is. It's just like a sneak. But without further ado, let's jump into how to recognize passive aggressive behavior. So the first one on my list is the silent treatment. So the silent treatment, when referring to as a passive aggressive manipulation technique, it's when somebody is using their silence to let you know that they're upset, that they're mad, that they're angry at you. They might give you the cold shoulder. You might walk to them and say something and they just ignore it. They don't even say anything in response. The point is to ruin your vibe, to make you feel pain because they're in pain. So another way this can kind of come out is stonewalling. And they might not be completely silent, but they're not engaging in conversations. They're dismissing your ideas, ignoring you. You might say a bunch of stuff and they kind of just give you a grunt. So I want to tell this one little story that I heard. So I actually heard this audio recording. It was from a really strong, overt narcissist that they had found, and they recorded this guy and they did like an interview, but they made it anonymous so that, he wasn't being exposed. So he was really talking quite freely, and he was talking about what he would do to his partner. So, they were going on in their lives, and he started to notice that if he pulled out the silent treatment and ignored her in certain ways, that she would almost turn towards him and give him more attention, pour the love onto him, try to make him feel better. And so he started doing this intentionally. It wasn't even that there was anything wrong. He just liked the attention. He liked the way that she responded to him when she was in pain, essentially. So in this interview, he talked about how at first, he would just do it for the afternoon, and he would sort of enjoy that attention that she would give back to him. And then he wondered, well, could he do it for a day, or 2 days, 3 days? And eventually he got to the point where, he was doing this to her for like a week at a time, putting her in this horrible place as she tried to fix the relationship. I completely relate to that. I'm the type of person that if there's a problem, I want to fix stuff. And so if somebody forces me into that place and won't let me have that place, it feels almost like torture. And so that's that malicious type of passive-aggressive behavior that I mentioned before. Other people will do this silent treatment, sort of more of that unintentional passive-aggressive behavior. They don't really have the tools, or they just don't really know how to voice their opinions and the issues and problems that they have. So they kind of just go into the silent treatment, and almost as a way to hopefully you figure it out. You figure out why I'm mad, right? Silent treatment is a terrible thing and a clear example of passive-aggressive behavior. So the second way to identify passive-aggressive behavior is the backhanded compliment. And I kind of briefly mentioned this in the intro, but a backhanded compliment can be kind of like sarcasm with a subtle dig or insult in it, or it could also be a compliment sort of with a hidden insult. So what's an example? It could be something like, you look great for your age. So, the sentence starts off as a compliment. If it ended after you look great, it's a compliment, but then it's like for your age. If we kind of took the age out of this, you're not looking so great, right? So you're kind of left like, do I look great? Do they think I look great, or do they not think I look great? Or something like, I really love your new hairstyle that you got. I really like that better than the old one. Wow, I really wish I could let my kids watch TV all day like you do. I'd have so much more time to do the things I want to do. So number 3 is withholding. And this could be things like withholding privileges that would otherwise be normal. So now suddenly your kids wake up, and let's say you always make them breakfast. And then today you just sit at the table and you don't make them breakfast. And they're sitting there going, okay, well, normally Dad makes us breakfast. He's not doing it today, so what's wrong? But it could be anything. It could be withholding anything: time, money, sex, or any type of behavior that you normally do as sort of just for free. So the fourth passive-aggressive behavior that I want to mention is evading issues that need to be discussed. And this can be done in a couple of different ways. Number 1 is like rug sweeping. It's like somebody who never will address a problem. They will just sweep them under the rug and pretend like everything's fine. But under the surface, these problems are sort of still there, and they're probably eating at the relationship, but this person doesn't want to deal with it. So another type of evading is the denier. They might claim there's nothing wrong, but then they're like slamming doors and acting in certain ways that clearly there's something wrong, but yet they won't talk about it. So number 6, one that I particularly despise, is learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is basically somebody pretending like they can't do something in an attempt to send a message that they don't really want to do. So let's give an example. Let's say I ask my roommate to sweep the floor, and this person just does a terrible job. And the underlying hope is that if they do a terrible job, that you won't ask them to do that anymore, and now they don't have to sweep the floor anymore. I think you see this a lot in romantic relationships where men are like, oh, I can't cook, and then they burn this dinner, and then everybody in the house is like, well, I don't want that guy making dinner again, so now he doesn't have to make dinner anymore. Or like, let's say he's cleaning the bathroom and he just does a really bad job. It's something that's kind of funny to me. Like, I know guys that will go to work and build really complicated, they're like an electronics engineer, building really complicated circuit boards, incredibly complex. But then they come home and pretend like, they can't make a simple stir fry for dinner. That right there is an example of helplessness. It's like, that they're capable of doing it, but they choose to be bad at it so that they don't have to do it. This one is really tricky. It actually takes a really critical eye to actually identify somebody who's actually not good at something and somebody who is sort of partaking in this learned helplessness. Like, on one hand, they're like super smart and capable, but then the next minute they're like really dumb and incapable. Like that right there is a red flag. So number 7 kind of falls into that malicious category, I think, and it's lateness when it's used as a weapon. So let's say if you agree to meet somebody at some place at a certain time, and they show up an hour late, and they kind of walk through the door. They're not really stressed out. They're not, sorry. They don't apologize for being late. And the general thing is that they want you to know that you don't control them. They'll show up when they want, or maybe they're upset at you for some reason, and it's like their way of getting back at you. They want to punish you in some way. So number 8 is gossip. And I'm sure we all know what gossip means, but I think really the key to gossip being malicious is really who you're talking to. If you're talking to your therapist or you're talking to your significant other and you're trying to work through some feelings, I personally don't think that is gossip. Where it becomes malicious is when they'll just talk to everybody and anybody, and the point is to ruin this person in some way. It's almost like a smear campaign. Often these people will use like subtle manipulations or subtle lies, or they'll leave certain information out to make the situation seem worse than it is. And now you've got this army of people who have all this true information, and then they'll almost go back and attack that person. It's a horrible thing, and in certain cases, gossip, it's almost like a culturally acceptable way to be passive aggressive, especially in relationships or when relationships end. It seems very common for people to tell everybody all the dirty secrets from this person and sort of try to ruin that person's reputation or that person's name. And even if that person did do some stuff, let's say there was some bad stuff going on in that relationship, it still should be dealt with in a different way than just trying to slander a person behind their back. So the 9th passive-aggressive technique I want to mention is the forced busyness technique. It seems like many people aren't able to actually say no, or they don't want to do something. Hey, would you like to come with me to do this? Rather than say, no, actually, I don't want to do that. They'll say, oh, I'm just too busy. I've got too many things going on. And I would say that's a very subtle, somewhat harmless way to use that passive-aggressive technique. But it can be used in worse ways. Let's say, you set up this dinner with your family. You've got your significant other is supposed to come with you. At the last minute, let's say they delayed some important work, and now they have, 3 hours of work, and it's already 8 p.m., and they really have to work on that for the next day. So they could have done the work earlier in the day and then come to the dinner. But now, conveniently enough, they're too busy to do it. I would say that is a more extreme version of the forced busyness, because it's almost like a planned thing. They sort of plan this busyness to conveniently pop up at the exact moment that they have to go for dinner because they don't want to go for dinner. And all of this is to avoid just saying, I don't want to go for dinner with your family, which of course might cause an argument. I think in the end, the passive-aggressive behavior is worse for the relationship than just voicing the problem and possibly having a disagreement or an argument about that issue. So number 10, and this is one that I feel intimately familiar with in my past relationships. It's when a person just ignores or doesn't prioritize things that are important to you. Like, let's say there's something really important to me, something that I really need to get done by a certain date, and they will purposely put it off, not deal with it, not prioritize it, almost as a way to be like, that's not important to me, like, don't bug me. So the 11th way you can recognize passive-aggressive behavior is when somebody just does something that they know that will piss you off. Like, let's say you're just an overworked mom at home, you got 3 kids, and you just sort of make a rule. You're tired of doing dishes all the time. You make a rule, can you please put your dish in the dishwasher? But now, as soon as somebody is upset or angry, let's say, and they just leave their dish on the counter just above you, sort of like they know it's your pet peeve, so they'll do it just to piss you off. So last passive-aggressive technique I'm going to mention today is disguising control as concern. So let's say somebody doesn't really like something that you're doing, and rather than them say, you know what, I don't like that, I wish you would make a change in your life, they instead act concerned about you in some way and almost try to trigger your empathy to try to make you change in that way instead. So what's an example? Let's say in a relationship, one person just really likes to eat out a lot, and the other person's kind of pissed because it's costing them a lot of money. Rather than that person saying, you know what, eating out too much, I don't want to eat so much, I want to save some money, I think we can try to make some more meals at home. They might try to disguise it as a bit of a concern. They'll be like, well, I'm just really concerned about your health. I think that you're eating out so much, or you're eating so much restaurant food. I just really don't think it's that great for you, and I wonder if you should consider, eating at home more a little often. So on the surface, it sounds kind of nice. It's like, oh, this person's concerned about me, and it turns out the real reason is that they want to save money, or they didn't want to say that, or they want to sound cheap, or whatever. So I've noticed a trend in myself the last few years, and I've kind of developed this zero tolerance policy towards passive-aggressive behavior. Sometimes gets me into a little bit of trouble, but my general policy is now, if I experience passive-aggressive behavior, I will call it out immediately. I'm not going to be a people pleaser. I'm not going to rug sweep that and then think about it for 4 days afterwards. Oh, what was that? Was that person mad at me? I just literally call it out right now. And at its core, what is that? I'm basically demanding a level of directness in my relationships, in my life at this point. I have no interest in having relationships with people that are being passive-aggressive to me, or being indirect, or not voicing their wishes in a direct way. I would encourage you to practice being direct. Confront issues. People might not be happy with you for doing that. They might call you a bitch. They might, think you're aggressive. They might call you scary. Just ignore all that. If you are a people pleaser and you want to stop doing it, this is one of the best ways to practice. Is just to be direct and actually speak your mind. Don't get upset. Don't fight people. But try to be diplomatic, but firm. If you guys have any questions about this, or comments of your own, or maybe you got some other example of passive-aggressive behavior, I think there's lots of them. I picked out my favorites here, but there's probably 50 more. Thanks for joining me for another video. Much appreciated. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye.
How to handle toxic people and call them out on their behavior. Part 2 of a special 3-part holiday series. So many people, they want desperately to stop cycles of difficult behavior, but they can't. They don't know how. Don't just tell them, show them. We teach by demonstration. That's how people teach, and that's how other people learn. They see it. So get ready, Rudolph, because someone's going to guide this way, and it's going to be you. By the way, if you're new to this channel, I'm communication skills expert Dan Connor, and I specialize in what's called tactical communication, which means I give you the words. And if you'd like more tactics like this, specific words or body language maneuvers that can help you achieve your communication goal, subscribe to this channel. And if you find value in this content, and you think others might as well, support this channel by hitting that notification bell. That's the best way to support us, and I would really appreciate that, especially during this holiday season. So that said, here's the gift I'm going to give you today. A 3-part process for calling people out on their behavior. So let's say that the behavior is something like this, okay? Let's say that you're at your holiday party, and you're there alone, because number 1, you wanted to spare your significant other of the process. But number 2, your significant other really didn't want to come because let's say that they are kind of exiled. And there's your cousin, Brian. And Brian knows that your partner's not there. And he's a scab picker. He likes to pick at people's scabs and their wounds, just for fun. So while you're eating your holiday bird, you're taking a nice chunk of dark meat, you're about to put it in your mouth, and Brian leans over and says, hey, Trixie, so where's your other half tonight? Are you guys not together anymore? And you think, all right, up with this, I shall put no more. This is where it ends. I'm going to say something. Here's a great way to say it, all right? Number 1, start off with the effect of their behavior. Number 2, state your response to their behavior. And then number 3, state the behavior. Now, there is a specific order to what I just said, and it sounds like it's almost backwards. When I call you out on your behavior, sometimes what I want to do is put your behavior at the end of the sentence, not say that first. Why? Let's review quickly where the power lives in our sentences. There's a power structure to our sentences. And when you know where the power lives in your sentence and deliver a message, keeping that in mind, placing the power where it should be, it can totally transform your message. Here's what I mean by that. The power in our messages that we send tends to lie at the beginning and at the end. So what I'm going to do is choose the end of this message as my most powerful location, and I'm going to plunk what I want everybody here to be aware of in that position. Watch how it can sound. You know, Brian, I'm assuming that you're not trying to be insulting. However, I'm going to step back from you and your comments and not engage with you on that or anything else like that that you say when you ask a rude, heterocentrist, ignorant question like that one. When you say it like that, that's like, ka-bong, that rude question that you just asked. Ka-bong, ka-bong, ka-bong. And you might want to just linger there for a moment and then move away. Charlie, could you pass that dark meat? That looks tasty. You know, remember, once you say something like that, and that's a big matzo ball to leave hanging out there, if you're a nice person, if you're uncomfortable with other people being uncomfortable, chances are you'll want to fill in that void, you know, and say something else after that. Don't do it. Let it hang. Let them go, flip. What are they going to say? All you did was clearly point out the behavior. That's it. That's all you're doing. 3-second look, remember. Hey, Charlie, could you pass that dark meat? Simple. Wait, I'd like to stop for a moment. Let me know, what are your specific memories or premonitions of things that people say during the holidays that you just can't believe that they say? Write them in the comments below. I'd like to hear what they are, okay? And I'd like to address them in a specific video like this. So please let me know specifically what are some holiday danger phrases that you have heard, are afraid of hearing, will hear, or maybe have said. Write them in the comments below. I'd like to hear it. Listen to Brian. He knows that you're married to a Mexican. And if you're at a holiday party like one of mine in my family, they're all the same. They're all white Irish Catholics. I don't know how they keep finding more white Irish Catholics. They keep finding them. So they're all there. And let's say that somebody says something to you like, hey, did you hear the one about the Mexican who wandered into Santa's village? And you think, oh, are you kidding? And so you say, what? Brian, hey, you know, I'm sure you're not trying to be insulting, but I'm going to have to say good evening and happy holidays and head on out if you're going to start telling racist jokes. What happened? What happened over there? Oh, Brian was telling racist jokes. Not Dan got offended. Dan was being really sensitive. Dan couldn't take a joke. I left you with what happened. It was the last thing I said. Brian, I'm sure you're not trying to be offensive, but I'm going to have to say good evening and happy holidays if you're going to start to tell racist jokes. Boom, 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 boom. Then you leave. There you go. You know, listen, that your boss said something to you. Like, hey, so you thanked Mary, by the way, for saving your ass during that last presentation when you totally forgot your words. Oh, John, I'm sure you're not trying to open up my wounds of the past and insult me right here in front of everybody at the holiday table. However, I'm going to call you on it if you keep making those types of passive-aggressive comments. People will be like, okay, I didn't know. All right, now you know. Hey, John, I'm sure you're not trying to insult me or my brothers or my sisters that might not happen to be in the room. However, I have to stop you before you go any further and let you know that I'm very sensitive and will call you out when you make those types of racist comments. Was anybody unclear about that? No? All right, it has the dark meat. I mean, we need to be clear. But when we are clear as to the behavior that we will or will not accept, that is when you will see great change. People will not be able to believe it. when you are that clear with your communication. And I structured it the right way. I told you, hey, here's the effect that it's having. I'm sure you're not trying to be rude. I'm sure you're not trying to show your roots. I'm sure you're not trying to be insulting. I'm sure you're not trying to open up my wounds of the past. I'm sure you're not trying to make me feel like less than other people here. I'm sure you're not trying to judge me right here at the holiday table. I'm sure you're not going to tell people and then say what you're not going to do, what you're not going to put up with, what the response will be from you or is from you, what the effect is. However, I'm not going to let that slide. I'm not going to sit down and just pretend like that's normal. I'm not going to accept those types of comments. I'm not going to listen to those jokes. I'm not going to let your behavior slide. I'm not going to accept passive aggressive comments. Then their behavior. If that's the type of racist thing you're going to say, if you're going to tell racist jokes, if you're going to make passive aggressive comments, if you're going to insult me or my brothers or sisters, if you're going to bring up the past, if you're going to try to shame me, once you've stated what they've done, leave it.
We'll grab that.
Give them the 3-second look. There we go. Now,
Thank you.
now, what are the keys for those? Well, I was just trying to tell a joke. Well, the way you do that is you tell a joke that's number one, inclusive, but number two, funny. Well, I was trying to make small talk. Well, in the future, if you're going to make small talk with me, I recommend you ask things like, hi, how have you been? How is your life going? How are things for you? Is everyone in your orbit safe and secure? That's how you start conversations like that. People will be like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Do it, because you have that in your brain. Let it out your mouth. Don't mince words. You don't have to be nervous. You don't have to sugarcoat it. Just say it. Well, in the future, I suggest that if you want to know how my business is going, you ask me, hey, Dan, how's your business going? That's how you say that. Simple. In the future, if you want to ask, how is my partner? Ask, hey, Dan, how's your partner? That's it. Simple. And as anyone here who has terminated a relationship can tell you, that's nothing to be ashamed of. Therefore, I would tell you, my partner and I are no longer in a romantic relationship. My partner is dead. My partner, whatever it is, that's not a thing of shame. And I would tell you, you can be upfront with your communication with me. I can take it. Something like that. You know what I mean? Let people know. I can take it. You can be direct with me. You can be honest with me. You can be clear with me. You don't need to beat around the bush. Just ask your questions if you have them. I will answer them. Just make sure they're clear, upfront, and appropriate questions for the venue. We are at the Christmas dinner table. Do you think that's an appropriate question for this venue? Ask people. What's going on in that brain? Ask them. Do ask them. And when you're telling people how to achieve that goal, don't say what you'd suggest or what you would suggest. Tell them, I suggest XYZ. In the future, if you have something to say to me, I suggest you say it to me. In the future, if you have a question as to whether something is or is not appropriate for the venue, I suggest you ask me in private. That will avoid the whole uncomfortable situation in which we now find ourselves. And even if they say something like, I'm not uncomfortable, well, I am, and it's because of the way you are communicating. And I'm asking you to stop. Is there a problem? Am I unclear in something that I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with telling somebody your communication is making me feel uncomfortable. But the way I would put it, there are many different ways to put it. One of the ways, depending on what they're doing or what they're saying or how you find the situation, is by saying, instead of, hey, I find your communication inappropriate. John, I'm sure you're not trying to be inappropriate, but I'm going to have to stop you there because I believe that at this venue, it is inappropriate to ask that question. So I'm, again, highlighting your question by placing it at the end. See what I mean? So the way you structure your sentence makes a big difference in the way the message will be taken by others. And remember not to tell people what you would suggest. This is what I suggest.